All right, so we're going to go to our next panel now. We've got moderator Melissa Zulpo, National Manager Environment and Social, and Michael Roth is in her panel along with Rick Lomax and Dr. Elena Pakinui Ra, and they will introduce themselves as they come up here. Thank you so much, panel. Come join us.
Wonderful. Now you'll have to forgive me. I am a newbie to trying the Maori language, so forgive me if my pronunciation is wrong. However, kia ora tatou. Hello everyone. I'm Melissa Zulpo, the ANZ Manager for Environment and Social at SMEC. With our origins in the Snowy Mountain Engineering Scheme, I like to think of us as the pioneers of large-scale renewables in Australia. I come to you today from the Kabi Kabi lands on the Sunshine Coast, Australia, so it's a real pleasure to be here and share this panel session with my fellow panellists. So I'll just start with giving a bit of an introduction to the session to set the scene. And then I'll introduce the panellists. So the panel discussion, improvement and innovation for best practice, embedding the sustainability at the outset. So infrastructure is critical to the sustainability of cities, regions and countries in the way that it addresses community needs and objectives, and how this is integrated into both the physical and the social context to optimise the benefits that can be generated. The significant investment required to deliver infrastructure assets, together with their long lifespans, typically means that infrastructure assets can fundamentally shape cities and regions for better or for worse, with long-reaching impacts. To be sustainable, infrastructure must be planned, designed, built and operated with a sound understanding of its role and meeting community needs and objectives. The first step in providing sustainable infrastructure is to consider the environmental, social, cultural and economic impacts and opportunities as part of the decision to respond to community issues. Indeed, in some scenarios, and we heard this earlier before, these can be met without needing to build the do-nothing approach and challenge the root cause of the need. Understanding the needs of government, mana whenua or other Indigenous land rights and spiritual connection to land and the wider community, and identifying and analysing options in a holistic way can ensure that rigorous planning and analysis underpins these investment decisions. Strategic planning considerations right at the beginning of an infrastructure project can be the most consequential for emissions outcomes and present the most opportunities to embed wider sustainability outcomes. IS planning rating supports projects at the early stage in the planning phase of infrastructure development, from initial problem identification through to procurement for design and construction. And the earlier in the process the planning rating is implemented, from great experience we all know that the most opportunities there are to create sustainable outcomes. By taking into account the whole of life impacts of decisions made in the planning phase, the planning rating contributes to and enhances sustainability outcomes achieved in the design and construction and operational phases. Here with me today, I've got a panel with multiple valued and deep perspectives on embedding sustainability at the outset, which will help us explore the opportunities and challenges and identify, hopefully, some tangible actions to take away. So I'll now just do a brief introduction to my guests and I'll let them introduce themselves as well. So I've got Rick Lomax sitting in the middle, Sustainability and Decarbonisation Senior Associate at Becker. He's passionate about supporting clients to understand and implement actions that unlock the value of sustainability and decarbonisation. He's helped some of the world's largest and Aotearoa, largest organisations and regions measure their carbon impact and take meaningful steps towards net zero. I'll let you introduce yourself, Rick.
Kia ora koutou, ko Rick Lomax tōku ingoa. Yeah, I think I'm here today to help unpick some of those bigger challenges and really start to think and show action around how we do that at the very earliest moment. I think there's always a need to really break down, and we've heard some really good words around systems thinking, around connectivity. What I think we're trying to do is really unpick those and give the implementation and the operationalization of those things and really try and deliver on them. So that's what I'm going to bring today, I hope.
Fantastic, thanks Rick. I've also got Dr. Elena Ra. Elena is the Indigenous Design Director at WSP. Elena is a strong advocate for Indigenous rights and ensuring Mana Whenua agency prevails in planning, design and construction processes. She's got extensive experience working with Indigenous peoples locally and internationally, with work focusing on social justice and equitable city making. Her PhD focused on Indigenous agency and planning and policy processes, and she's focused on working to achieve social justice, equitable city making and placekeeping. Welcome, Elena.
Thank you so much. Te mea tuatahi a he mihi nui ki ngā mana whenua o tāmaki makaurau kia kōrua, Adrian, rau ko Jeff. Ko wai au, ko auraki me he kororoa ka mauka, ko wakawaiti te awa, ko puke te raki te papatupu marae, ko ka waka e tori ko uruao ko arai turu me take tēmu hoki, ko kaitahu te iwi, ko tahu pōtiki te tupuna, ko au e tūnei, ko Elena Ra, tā koe koa. Kia ora everybody, my name is Elena. Thank you so much for the introduction. I think that probably says most of the things that I'm interested in, but it really is a focus on looking at Mana Whenua agency, particularly on major infrastructure projects which are still struggling to achieve great outcomes for our Māori communities, and looking at how we can embed Māori values into planning and design around infrastructure from the outset, so we can start to have that intergenerational lens on what it is that we're putting into our built environment. So hopefully that'll make a valuable contribution to the panel.
Thanks, Elena. And my final guest is Michael Roth. Michael is the Lead Transport Advisor for Auckland Council. He's got 25 years experience in delivering transport policies and projects across both New Zealand and Australia. He has a strong focus on decarbonisation, electrification, micromobility, parking, accessibility, behaviour change and safety research, as well as policy development and advocacy. Welcome, Michael. Introduce yourself.
Kia ora koutou, Michael Roth, as Lead Transport Advisor for Auckland Council. In many ways, I'm the bridge between the politicians and the technocrats or bureaucrats, so I try to be between those two worlds and translate for the two, because there's different languages spoken. And have a focused, long background on sustainability related issues from the rail industry, Queensland Government, Automobile Association over in Queensland as a consultant on transport modelling and planning, and more recently, obviously, almost 2 years now in Auckland.
Thanks, Michael. So we'll start off with some questions for the panellists. We've talked a little bit about the importance of embedding sustainability at the outset. I'd be really interested, Michael, I'll ask this question of yourself. Where have you seen a successful change in an infrastructure solution to resolve an identified environmental or social issue? And by that I mean you've got an initial project brief that was changed for a different, more sustainable solution. If you can unpack that a little bit, that'd be great.
I thought about this for a bit, and the idea came to me of one of the very original things that I saw in this sector that introduced me to sustainability, and it was led very much by Scott Losey, who some of you may know, because he had a lot to do with the ISC and helped establish it in Australia. And that was, there was a motorway upgrade planned just south of Brisbane, essentially turning a 6-lane motorway into 8 lanes, and Scott and several others managed to convince the government of the time to build a busway instead. So instead of 8 lanes of car traffic, there was 6 lanes of car traffic and 2 lanes of buses, and that's now the South East Busway, the most successful busway probably in Australia, and there's been a model for a lot of development since. So that for me was a real important learning. It was, didn't reduce embodied energy, probably cost a bit more, but has delivered real sustainability outcomes, including in perspectives, how people view the system. More recently, there's been a lot of work in Auckland Transport to reframe how they look at cycling projects, which has been quite interesting to me. Effectively, if you dig up the curb, you've got to deal with drainage, you're going to hit other utilities, so forth. It becomes a more expensive project. Obviously, if you follow the Transport Design Manual properly, you will often have to dig up the curb because we're dealing with old assets. But they've tried to reframe their process and look wherever possible at leaving the curb where it is and working within that boundary and just reallocating the space, reworking how they fit into that corridor, and hence saving a lot of money, bringing the cost of the projects down. And in the context of the debate today around budget problems and social licence for delivery of certain projects and inability to deliver, that's really been, I think, a successful way of reframing and enabling them to go forward.
Yeah, fantastic. And some really, fantastic examples of where that change has actually occurred. Inspirational to challenge us all to ask do you really need to build this question? Any other inputs from the other panellists, like Rick or Elena? No? We'll move on. It'd be good to unpack a little bit, Rick, about what is the most successful approach that you've experienced with embedding sustainability in the early planning phases of a project. If you can elaborate and provide some reference to some key decision-making milestones or approaches that were taken in those instances to get successful traction to integrate sustainability.
Awesome, thanks, Melissa. And we've heard these words quite a few times today, but I want to start with some of the principles and kind of unpick those examples. But if we fail miserably from day one to set the right vision of what we're trying to achieve with some of these projects, even if it's really aspirational and we're absolutely shooting for the stars, if we don't set out on that journey from day one with that vision, we're really going to struggle to deliver something aspirational and transformational. So even if it's scary and it feels dangerous and risky to be putting it out there that this is what we're trying to achieve, that is the fundamental kind of milestone for some of these key projects. And setting that vision, that can't be done in isolation. That needs the community to come on board and tell us what does a low carbon, sustainable, resilient, culturally appropriate and still enhancing, community really look like. And if they can tell us that and we can understand it, that's the first step. Because a piece of infrastructure is not an island on its own. It's going to have to interact with that system, that network, using those buzz terms again. But if we don't understand that vision in the first place, we don't know if that piece of infrastructure is going to be a good project and support that vision. If you're ever lacking in inspiration, have a look at some of the cities that have written some really awesome plans around, the C40 Cities framework. There's some really inspirational stories there from individual projects all the way through to a kind of a whole system plan. So that's the art of the possible, and understanding that's really, really important. But next step is, once you've got the vision, actually making it happen is the hard bit. And we've talked a lot about, needing data to do that. We've talked a lot about having the right tools or the right information. But quite often, we just need to ask ourselves, what's the kind of framework that's going to start unpicking that vision? And sometimes there's some efficiency in that journey, and sometimes we need to be a bit more transformative as well. There's some really good client examples out there as well. ISK itself is one of those awesome frameworks that helps start to unpick that vision. But also we've been doing a lot of work, and I know a lot of consultants in the room do as well, because we're in an alliance with you on this, but New Zealand Defence Force have a sustainable infrastructure strategy. And that breaks down from the kind of core principles of what they're trying to achieve on a project and really details that journey. It doesn't have all the answers, that's the whole point. It gives you the framework to make those decisions to try and unlock that outcome. So that's amazing. And then another example I wanted to quickly share is we're seeing the ask, especially from local government more and more, who are currently about to start their next round of long-term plan thinking, their 10-year investment plan, is how do we know when we're saying yes to these projects that they're going to create an outcome or going to support the outcome? We've set a net zero target by 2050. We've said we want to be a resilient city. How do we know that this bunch of projects that we're going to invest in is going to unlock that? So we've been scratching our heads a little bit at Becca, and we've been trying to help unpick how do we take that information from the end of a design project, i.e. we understand the tons of carbon of the project, its enabled emissions, and how do we start bringing that information much earlier into the design making process, i.e. before it even gets locked in as an investment decision. And I think the more we can kind of bring that information further forward, that gives as much information as we can. It gives councils the ability to be informed, and if they need to go ahead with a project that doesn't quite achieve their carbon goals, then that's fine, because there could be other drivers around resilience, around health and safety, and that's fine, but at least we can give the information to be slightly more informed at that early investment decision-making process.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Rick. Lots of different elements in there to unpack, and one of them you mentioned probably draws into the next question. You mentioned there about the importance of early consideration of carbon and considering that as early in the planning phase as possible. So if we're all sitting in a room and a thought bubble is being generated about the need for a project, what disciplines do we think should be in the room to unpack that problem identification, project concept phases? What would your ideal project team or people in the room look like? Alana, did you want to elaborate further from your perspective?
I have some fairly strong opinions about who should be at the table, at what points they should be at the table. Look, I think one of the most critical parts of the conversation that has to happen really early, and I alluded to it before, is that conversation with mana whenua. It's really understanding those iwi aspirations from the beginning, and that's at all levels of the project. That's in our governance structures, that's in our project teams, whether that's iwi turning up themselves or whether that's their technical advisors. Mana whenua will often have a technical advisor or a number of technical advisors that can participate in those conversations. And I think it's then looking at how we actually bring that through into all of the technical disciplines, and with potentially a greater emphasis that I still fail to see actually on a number of major infrastructure projects, which is a focus on our social outcomes. We build infrastructure for people. We tend to get a little bit caught up in the infrastructure itself, whether it's the transport planners or it's the developers or whoever it is that we are working with. That space tends to still be a little bit business as usual. We're not focusing as much on those social impacts as we could be. Having the people at the table that understand that also understand what is happening with our climate, and then also looking to the economists for some guidance, and particularly our Māori economists, for guidance around how this infrastructure that we're building is actually going to benefit communities so that they can be prosperous and thriving into the future. So look, I think there's a shift that's happening in our nation, and that's that the governance structures that we're operating within are changing, and our needs are changing as we respond to this climate emergency. And that means we need different people at the table who maybe haven't been there so much traditionally on our infrastructure projects. Yeah.
Thanks, Elena. Anything to add from yourselves, Rick or Michael?
Yeah, just to try and link those kind of 2 points together, and it was mentioned earlier around this word value, and if we can't define that vision and the value we're trying to unlock, we do measure things in quite a financial way too many times, but actually if we paused and said, what's the value we can create from making this community look, feel different through the infrastructure investment we make, we can unpick some of the biggest societal ills around inequity, around how infrastructure supports health and well-being, that maybe we don't need the same level of infrastructure deficit. It was mentioned before around health having a major infrastructure deficit. So let's think about how do we keep people out of the hospital in the first place rather than just keep building more hospitals. And I know it's a big, big problem, but if, again, it goes back to my point around if we don't set the right level of aspiration, we'll keep doing things BAU.
I'd also just add to that briefly. We need to involve politicians early on. A lot of people, I think, we have the tendency to go, well, if only there was political leadership, we would get something done. And, the politicians make all the decisions, we may not like it. But we need to take them on the journey. They have different priorities, different levels of understanding to us. We need to educate them. We need to bring them along. We need to stand in their shoes sometimes, see what perspective they have, and try to get them up to speed so they're willing to take some risks to support new ideas and not just follow what they believe is the first top of mind issue in the community.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. I might just delve a little bit deeper into the importance of Indigenous and local community engagement and participation. So we know that involving Indigenous and local communities leads to better sustainability outcomes, yet the public and private sector proponents tend to be quite fearful of early engagement and of releasing too much information. What if there's changes? How do you think, Elena, that we can reconcile this dilemma in practice?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting time in our history as a nation and overseas, and we're having some big conversations that we thought we were having, but we probably actually weren't. The true actualisation of Te Tiriti is coming. That is changing the governance structure that is Aotearoa at all of the levels. But we're still seeing a huge amount of, and I'm going to say it, it's a terrifying word or words, we're still seeing a huge amount of white fragility and anxiety around that. It's really quite incredible that in this day and age we are still nervous about what governance will look like in this nation and nervous about a shift in power. And I think that's a really big conversation that we have to have. We're seeing it in the media very regularly. We're seeing it at the tables that we're having these conversations. But one of the things I've really noticed is the difference between working in Te Whenua Moemoeā, or so-called Australia, and looking at the different types of conversations we're having there and the types of conversations we're having here in Aotearoa. We are a little nation. We all like to be friends. We spend a lot of time together because we're a small industry. And it seems to me that that's resulting in us avoiding difficult conversations so that we don't upset one another. But the reality is that we're here, and I actually find in Australia that they were having more robust and rigorous conversations around what we should be looking at and how we should be considering governance. It's going to bring out a nervousness, I think, that people are afraid that if we share governance, that it's going to result in Māori taking over the nation. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about intergenerational outcomes that need intergenerational thinking. That's where the value of working with mana whenua actually really sits.
Yeah, fantastic insights. Yeah, Michael.
I'll jump in with another political point on that. Many will know that the Mayor has had a different view to Auckland Transport on their level of understanding of the community. The Mayor's actually asked in the letter of expectations for a deeper understanding. So you can interpret that as that AT needs to do more surveying. But AT already do a lot of surveying. One thing I like to point out is, you can ask the community, do they want to pay more tax? 90-something% will say no. You can ask them, do they want safer roads? 90-something% of the community will say yes. But neither of those questions are interesting. What's interesting is working out, well, how much more tax would they want to pay for what level of safety benefit? We've got to get into that complexity. We've got to get an in-depth understanding, not the first stated preference result, but a process of citizens' assemblies or really weighing up the trade-offs to understand what the community really wants, not just what comes out of their head when asked a simple question.
Thanks, Michael. I think it's just worth noting too that, and Michael, you've got experience in Australia as well, and we touched a little bit on this, Elena as well, with your period that you spent there. There are certainly a lot of differences and similarities between the two countries and how we operate in this space, but it is quite inspirational from my perspective, my observations, how much the embracing of Māori culture is here, and I think there's certainly a lot to be learnt and taken on board in the Australian context, so certainly a takeaway from me. We'll dive a little bit more into, I suppose, we've moved on, the piece of infrastructure is now going ahead. So certainly in the work that we've done at SMEC, that early integration of sustainability through the planning phase is so critical in ensuring the key assessments beyond business as usual are undertaken to guide and inform the future design and construction phases. often you go through that business case phase, and a lot of the opportunities really lie there. So what do you think are the key focus areas that you've found that can make a significant difference in setting sustainability up for success, and to what level of detail? For example, Indigenous people engagement and consultation, climate change adaptation and resilience, workforce planning, or addressing legacy issues and articulating benefits realisation. Mick, did you want to start with that, and I'll pass on to Elena?
Okay, it's a lot of things in that question. One thing I'd like to point out is, we've just put together the transport emissions reduction pathway, which is what we need to deliver the C40 goal of halving Auckland's emissions. So that requires a very large reduction in vehicle travel. So you look at infrastructure, transport infrastructure very differently when you're looking at it from a context of the future. There will be fewer cars on our roads. So we don't need to expand roads. The question becomes much more about how do we get the most productive and efficient use of what we've got? How do we use our asset management processes, our renewals, our maintenance, to repurpose our existing asset to deliver more? And we have an ageing asset, so a bigger proportion of our spend will be going on existing assets rather than building new ones. So it really changes your sustainability thinking. It's not just about new projects. We need to move much more into the repurposing of existing projects, working out how to get more value or more productivity, however you want to put it, out of what we've already got. That's quite a different discussion to, weighing up impacts on the harbour of some piers versus, more embodied energies of tunnels. It's about looking at what you've already got. How can we use that so we don't have to spend all this extra money and resources in new infrastructure? So,
fantastic. Yeah, great insights. And Elena?
Yeah, look, I think the only thing that I'd sort of add to that is really starting to think about those words, and they were in the question there, consultation and engagement, and they are very different things. We are still doing consultation when we actually should be working together in partnership, and I think that truer actualisation of Te Tiriti o Waitangi is when that partnership relationship is one that is reciprocated, and it is one that's fair and reasonable, and that there's equity for all the parties that are involved. And I just think that that's where we're going to get to great outcomes. Nothing is truly independent. This is all about interdependencies through natural systems, human systems, and the built environment, and thinking about how that all comes together. Yeah.
Community-led engagement. Just to finish off, we're almost out of time. Always nice to finish with some specific advice that people can take away with. So a question for all of you, we'll just go in order. If you can give one piece of specific advice to the planners, owners, proponents out there for the value of integrating sustainability into the planning, optioneering phase of the projects, what would it be? Michael?
We're in a budget emergency, so save money and work out how to make the most of what we got.
Fantastic.
I'm going to be the exact opposite. Keep asking questions. If we're not asking the right question, we're not going to get the right answer. And if we ask the question, how quickly can we replace this wastewater treatment plant, we will get exactly the same wastewater treatment plant that doesn't get those broader outcomes. So ask ourselves and keep asking ourselves questions, whether you're the CEO or the project lead or whether you're the digger driver on site. If we understand the vision and ask questions, we can deliver the outcomes that we all want.
And Elena?
Yeah, look, I think it's question how you're showing up. Question how you're showing up in partnership at an individual level, at a corporate level, and whether you are truly recognising how accountable you are or whether you are complicit in the problem. We're pushing the waka out. It's leaving the shore, jump in, or we're going without you. So hopefully see you there.
Fantastic. Real diverse response. Please join me in a round of applause for all our panellists.